It was against the rules to interfere with an ongoing battle. If no penalty existed, there couldn't be a fair fight in the arena. It seemed they were lenient since it was his first time. However, it couldn't be helped. To be 100% certain of my victory, I need to save them. Myung found the way to win against Olonis. Bug and his colleagues possessed the decisive key to winning. He's similar to me. The way he fights, his habits, everything. Myung couldn't help but be surprised as the fight intensified. Olonis was too similar to Myung himself. At least in terms of fighting. He was careful and had the ability to find the best route of attack. They were even similar in the sense that they both used spectre-like skills. Amazing. His senses, judgment skills, etc. How could he be this similar to him? The more he looked at it, he couldn't help but laugh. It was as if he had a mirror in front of him. Of course, there wasn't even a big difference in fighting strength. Especially the existence of that eye that appeared in the end was something Myung needed to be cautious about. Winning ratio 5-5. Before seeing the eye, the chance he would win was higher, but with the appearance of the eye, it balanced out the difference. That was why the slightest difference would have an effect on the victory. And for that he needed to save them. Dakibi, why are you siding with humans? Olonis ground his teeth. He was currently agitated. His 3 eyes were dyed red. He did his best to suppress his urge to attack. It's for my victory. Myung didn't hide the truth. Olonis was too similar to Myung. He couldn't really believe it, but it was true. That was why he didn't feel the need to hide his true intentions. Especially since lies wouldn't work in front of the 3rd eye on his forehead. The place for our fight isn't here. That isn't something that you decide. Myung held Anguish and the wicked god's sword. He showed a strong determination that he was going to continue if Olonis wasn't willing to stop. While doing this, he turned his head halfway to look at Bug. Bug, who realized Myung's intentions, quickly got up, supported the warrior and grabbed the warrior's arm that flew off. Thank you. This debt I will surely. Bug and his comrades escaped the arena as fast as they could. Soon after, from afar, tens of living armor appeared. While looking at them, Olonis mocked him. It's such a moving scene. As expected for a guy who smells of Gremory. Myung's brows moved as he heard the unexpected name. Gremory. The one who held the 56th seat of the 72 demon gods. The only demon goddess. The one who ruled over 26 demon armies. And Myung currently had the qualifications to become the 27th demon king under Gremory. Olonis looked at Anguish after reading Myung's expression. I know that sword very well. I also know the owner of the scent you give off. As the subordinate of that traitor B****, it's beautiful how you side with humans. Traitor? It was a remark where he couldn't find a speck of respect for demon gods. However, Myung pretended as though he knew nothing. I don't know what nonsense you're speaking of. Are you pretending that you don't know, or do you really not know? You're the first one that I can't easily read with this eye. However, it is clear that you are related to that B****. He bared his teeth. The power of traitors are small. You started a fight you can't win. That means no matter how many people like yourself make an effort outside, it's all meaningless. And once everything is settled, the humans you sided with will all walk the path of destruction in an instant. Myung was slightly provoked by him as he talked, but he remained calm. Even if he was a bit surprised, he made a conclusion that it would be dangerous for him to act as if he knew what Olonis was talking about. As Myung continued to be non-responsive, Olonis turned his body as if he lost interest. After all, you're also aiming the place beyond the door the Cerberus protects. Me for my honor, you for your own use. We are searching for that item. The place for us to fight is there. Afterwards, Olonis left the arena as if he had no regrets. As Myung watched him leave, tens of living armors surrounded Myung. Everything was blocked in the cell. It was extremely cramped and it was even difficult to breathe. Since it was made out of an unknown material, it was hard to smash the wall. It wasn't impossible to get out of this place, but he didn't find it necessary. When everything is settled, the demon gods will start to move. By settle, does that include the power-associated Gremory? However, it was better this way. No matter how cramped and uncomfortable it was, Muyang wasn't restricted by the location. If normal monsters were locked in a place like this, they would show all kinds of symptoms of mental disorder, but Muyang had already overcame those things in the past. On the other hand, he gained time to slowly think things through. In 10 years, the Great Calamity started and the demon gods attacked the humans. However, not all demon gods participated. Including Gremory, few demon gods didn't appear from the start. He didn't even have to think 10 years later. When humans first entered the underworld, demon gods did not actively attack them. At most, the demon kings made their move. However, what if there was a reason why all the demon gods couldn't leave their territory? Was there an internal conflict? And did that conflict resolve within 10 years? Perhaps they made their moves after the conflict was resolved, which led to the start of the Great Calamity. Muyang's heart started to beat a little faster. The demon gods also have factions. No one knew. Of course they didn't know. There would have been no way for humans to know if the problem amongst the demon gods was solved before they started to make their move. He couldn't be certain. However, all possibilities were open. I need to ask Olonis directly. Muyang nodded. He was certain he could ask Olonis after beating him. Muyang knew how to find out what he wanted to get in the room beyond the door the Cerberus was protecting. Muyang calmly sat. He quietly concentrated and drew a picture in his mind. Moving your body isn't the only way to train. More realistic imaginations than reality. Muyang prepared for all the moves as he drew the fight with Olonis in his mind. After 3 days, he was instantly matched with a fight as he left the cell. Muyang stretched his body before heading for the arena. Thank you. On his way, Bug was waiting for him. He was also with his comrades and everyone had their heads lowered. They were hopeless and embarrassed, but it was true that they did receive help from him. They didn't know how to act and just had their heads lowered. Muyang didn't really help them to receive thanks. He only helped them because he wanted something. The price for reckless actions is death. You were lucky this time. We know. If it wasn't for you, we would have all died. But, as Bug tapped the shoulders of a comrade beside him, his comrade said a word of thanks to Muyang. Even the guy who was pale. It was the huge shield-bearing warrior who stood in the front lines and had his left arm cut off. Even if they had a priest, it seemed like the blessing of strength didn't work for him. This was because Olonis' power of evil was much greater than the experience level of the priest. However, they felt something much better than the pain and sorrows of losing. You want revenge? Bug widened his eyes. He roughly understood what Muyang wanted to say. Are you willing to work? No, I will fight alone. Instead, I'll give you a chance. However, Muyang shook his head. Instead, he took out a talisman from his side. And after he shook the talisman, 2 undead appeared in front of them. The Black Sun Warrior in full armor and Heidegger stood stiffly before they kneeled. Undead. Everyone was alert as the undead suddenly appeared. They held their weapon and prepared themselves. Since they were humans, living beings, it was a natural reaction. Muyang spoke calmly. Strengthen these 2 by using the blessing of the cloud and soul language. You know how to use Order Bless, right? Order Bless was a high-rank blessing. The strength that allowed a strong reflective power against specters and the dead. The priest shook his head. It's impossible. With my skills that much. However, Order Bless was a blessing that could only be used when few priests combined their strength. Unless you were a top-ranked priest, it was impossible for someone to do it alone. Muyang chuckled. You should be able to with Bug's soul language. Your soul language seemed to be different than normal. A stronger power. I could feel Draken's energy. How did you know? Bug's eyes widened. Draken was a half-dragon. A Draken born from a dragon and a different species could use dragon language. They manipulated a language a class above than normal soul language. He didn't know at first. It was a truth he found out after awakening his purity and watching Bug use his powers. If he didn't find out, he wouldn't have saved them. Even your name bug is a lie, since the dragon language is so strong that the user even needs to hide their true name. The difference I felt continuously was because of this. The tips of Muyang's lips slowly went up. From the first time he met him and heard his name, he felt something was different. Most soul language users were famous, but it was odd that he never heard of his name before. However, if it was the dragon language user, the story was different. Bug was beyond astonished as he had an expression as though his soul was drained out of him. Are you still going to say it's impossible? Also, with the power of the dragon language, it was possible for the priest's prayer to be helped. Priests could produce a power a level stronger than before. Shortly, Bug admitted. It's possible. However, even if we could use Order Bless, we can't apply it on undead. For now you can't. Muyang turned his head and looked at the arena. A completely white monster known as an Arc Troll was waiting for him. Arc. It meant it had quite a lot of resistance to darkness and light, and if he was to transplant its heart in Heidegger, it would be able to handle Order Bless. The Black Sun Warrior already had a strong resistance to light. On top, if the power of fire which Muyang had was added, it didn't seem impossible. Wait for me. Muyang walked up by himself. His eyes sparkled. I realized you and I are alike. It should be meaningless to hide any further. The third eye Olonus possessed could understand all of Muyang's strength. Muyang also understood Olonus' true power. Since it meant it was pointless to keep hiding his strength, he was going to try his best. Blaze. Wings of fire sprouted from Muyang's back. Cry of fire. It was a skill the blazing spear soldier used, but Muyang had taken it from him using soul exploitation. However, the flame was much more intense than when the blazing spear soldier used it. Quickly and overwhelmingly. If up until now was a warm-up exercise, from now on he was planning on being a rough typhoon that will destroy everything that blocks his path. If it was pointless for him to hide his strength from Olonus, he was going to make him be alert by showing his true strength. Olonus would become more cautious and careful after attempting to understand Muyang, and those exact actions would be his downfall. As he was narrow-minded and Muyang knew how to use everything. This small but critical difference would change the results. Arc Trolls were mutant species. Their white skin made people think of albinos. Also, mutant species could never mix into their group. Normally, mutant species were abandoned and would die in the wild, but due to certain circumstances, a very few of them survived. And those mutant species that survived possessed a stronger strength than their counterparts. It was the result of their struggles. One was able to exhibit the power of more than 5. On top of that, there were times when monsters with Arc in their names had strengthened inherent abilities besides their resistance to darkness and light. And trolls were typically a race that possessed outstanding recovery. What we are seeing now isn't a dream, right? Bug blankly opened his mouth, with an expression as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The rest of his comrades' expression weren't greatly different from his. He outran Arc Troll's recovery ability. Can a Dakibi who isn't even a Duaxini be that strong? An Arc Troll was able to instantly recover after being cut or pierced. If he was burned, it ripped that part off and continued to recover. It was literally an astonishing recovery ability. However, Muyang, who was facing the Arc Troll, was more astonishing. At first, Bug thought he was a somewhat special Dakibi. Although he had a horn, and even if he was a king, since he wasn't a Duaxini, his fighting ability shouldn't have been greatly different. However, his perception of him shattered after he began to fight in the arena. Repeated victories. After the appearance of Olonus, Muyang instantly became a star in the arena. And he now showed strength far greater than a Duaxini and captivated his audience. Blaze. The flames that soared from Muyang's back damaged the entire arena. He swung his 2 swords and sliced off the Arc Troll's body as if he was carving a sculpture. This meant that the power he had shown until now wasn't even the tip of the iceberg. The Arc Troll was unable to resist him once. Or is the Arc Troll just weak? The priest replied as the girl in charge of the archer position asked. No, that Dakibi is just stronger than what we imagined. Usually people say that Arc Troll could exhibit the power of 10 trolls, but I'm not sure. It was true. Arc Trolls were never weak. He was just strong. Bug's whole body shivered. Muyang possessed a keen insight that could identify his true character, the strength to back it up and even the meticulousness to plan ahead. He turned his head to look at the undead. I never heard of Dakibis that could manipulate death. Gulp. Bug felt like his saliva was drying up. Sword and magic on top of that, he could manipulate death. He never heard of a monster that could use various different skills. There was human. Only humans could use strength in so many different ways like him. Brr. As he thought that, his whole body shivered again. Is he really not a Dakibi but a human? He could appear as a Dakibi as an effect of a skill. Bug saw through him accurately but became even more confused. At that moment the fight ended. The fight ended and the arena became quiet. It was because he ended the fight by one-sidedly showing strength equal to or possibly greater than Olonus. Thump. Thump. In the narrow hallway he walked towards him. The sound of his footsteps seemed especially loud. Are you really a Dakibi? Bug couldn't help but ask. Muyang's eyes turned towards him and at the same time he felt a chilling feeling piercing through his body. However, this question was quite important. Human or Dakibi? If he was a human, he needed to act more carefully. Soul language users received attention wherever they went, and since he, a dragon language user, was a level higher than them, it would only lead to a bigger commotion. The world wasn't that easy. People who tried to use others were widespread. However, if someone other than his comrades were to know this truth, in Bug's position it was a matter of life and death. Muyuk slowly opened his lips. I'm the ruler of Dakabis and the companion of souls. I'm even a lord who rules over quite a big territory. Then he shoved the still-beating Arc Troll's heart he held in his hand into where Heidegger's heart would normally be located. It was a completely strange scene, but Muyang didn't even bat an eye. Werewolf's heart has been changed to Arc Troll's heart. The tips of Muyang's lips slightly curved upwards. Afterwards Muyang looked at Bug. I understand what your worries are. However, this much caution was something any explorer should have. As Bug looked at him with doubt, he continued to talk. Your worries won't come true. The ritual of order bless. I will start right away. You're wise. He picked things up quickly. He quickly understood what Muyang wanted to say. It was obvious as his main weapon were words. Olonus is my prey. Awaiting his death will also be amusing. Muyang spoke confidently before he walked away. Victor effect has been added. Victor is a qualification that allows you to take away an opponent's continuous victory. It is only activated when the opponent dies. Fight with your victory on the line. Muyang immediately went down to the next floor. When he entered the third floor, the number of monsters were a lot less than before. Normally, if they were able to reach the third floor, it was because they had gathered 1,000,000 ons and left the arena. At the very least, there weren't many monsters that were obsessed with obtaining an escape ticket. However, while the numbers were small, they didn't lack strong individuals in the arena. Every monster was starving to fight, and fighting was their only goal. Of course, there wasn't a better battleground to activate the Victor effect. There was also an unexpected change. That 2 undead were added as warriors in the arena. It all happened so naturally. So that no one could realize that Muyang was their owner, he made them act like others. Sure enough. He was half in doubt, but his plan was successful. However, even if the undead won, the victory did not go to Muyang. They measured the outcome differently. It was better this way. If they were measured together, it would mean that their wins and loss would also be together. If they were to lose even once, the record of his continuous wins would all go to waste. Anyhow, Muyang was planning on using Black Sun Warrior and Heidegger to hold Olonus back. The source of Olonus' strength was very similar to Muyang. Of course, their weakness would also be similar. While Order Bless is in effect, Olonus' attacks won't work. At least he could say that Spectre-type skills would be useless. He couldn't do anything about physical attacks, but Black Sun Warrior and Heidegger's endurance were formidable without a doubt. And Olonus' physical attacks weren't that strong. It seemed strong because he strengthened them with the strength of specters. If they were to fight, it was possible to continuously drain his stamina. Myung swung his two swords. At the same time, the hairy abominable snowman's head fell to the floor. The rank of Swordmaster skill went up. F-E. Swordmaster. Like the title, it was a skill that allowed him to become the master of his swords as it increased in rank. Myung was trained to be able to use all weapons, but he was far from having a deep understanding of them. However, after learning the Swordmaster skill for the first time, he was able to question about what was a sword. On top of that, his understanding of swords and skills had also increased. I'm not going to stop. Myung was naturally getting stronger. His development speed was ridiculous, however, that didn't mean he wasn't devoted to the basics. It would have been impossible if he was his past self. Even the strong individuals who were known as world-class geniuses couldn't have developed as fast as Myung. However, Myung didn't doubt his growth. It was because he knew that his growth would stagnate the moment he doubted it. Not long until 10 million ons. The betting ratio was continuously getting lower. However, once he collected 10 million ons, he would have basically achieved his first goal. Cerberus. The gatekeeper of the last gateway. To attack Cerberus, he needed 3 things. One of which was a special incense that could be purchased with 10 million ons. Since the fight with Olonus wasn't everything, he needed to prepare ahead. Even if the level of arena increased, Olonus and Myung were like 2 running horses. No monster could stop the two. As if they made a promise, the 2 ran forward, only looking ahead. However, that all ended on the next floor. Dakibi Myung has chosen Slave Devil Olonus as his opponent. As if Myung had been waiting for this moment, he chose Olonus. Olonus had already used a lot of stamina fighting Black Sun Warrior and Heidegger. His mind and body had become exhausted from the appearance of new foes. Now was his chance to strike him from the rear when he least expected it. Olonus had a strange expression on his face, as if he didn't expect to be chosen yet. I think I said this wasn't the place you and I were going to fight. I choose the place I fight. There was no reason for him to follow Olonus' intentions. And it wasn't like Myung to lose his most advantageous chance. On the other hand, Olonus fought continuously because he was planning to fight him on the first floor. He didn't even think about saving his stamina. Especially since Black Sun Warrior and Heidegger held him back, his specter strength was significantly weakened. You think well for someone related to Gremory. Myung chuckled. He thought Olonus would denounce him for being a coward, but it was the opposite. In a battlefield where people had to kill one another, one must do whatever it took to win. Since Olonus was also the same, he was taken back but wasn't angry at Myung. A devil wasn't just a devil for no reason. He's not easy to provoke. Olonus wasn't the type to be provoked easily. The more he was provoked, the clearer his mind would become. Instead of provoking him, it was better to just show his skills. Myung slowly unsheathed Anguish and his wicked god's sword. And while looking at Myung, Olonus coldly said, "Ah, I will make you regret your decision." "I never regret my decisions," Myung instantly replied. Olonus didn't know what kind of life Myung had lived. And what an amazing happiness it was to be able to make your own choices. How far he had come compared to his past, where his right to make his own choices had been revoked. How could he regret his own decisions? At least, since returning to the past, Myung had never regretted a single decision he had made. He always did his best to produce the best results. It was the same right now. Fung. Anguish and wicked god's sword rang fiercely. Olonus' expression hardened right away. He instantly opened his third eye and got ready to attack Myung. He also realized that he could instantly get attacked if he was to engage half-heartedly. Olonus raised his hand as he opened his eye halfway. Numerous hands appeared from the floor to hold Muyang back, but it was useless. Blaze. The flames that soared from his whole body refused the hands of the specters. The cry of fire had the basic property of rejecting darkness. Shadow teleportation and acceleration. And Muyang knew that Olonis became defenseless when he summoned his hands. Using shadow teleportation, he moved behind Olonis and used acceleration on Hermes's boots. Duration 3 seconds. Olonis' eyes moved and detected Muyang, but he was too slow. Anguish moved first and sliced through Olonis' shoulder. However, the wicked god's sword missed. It was because Olonis instinctively twisted his body after receiving a blow. At the same time, a small beam shot out in a straight line from his third eye. Push. A wall on the side of the arena was destroyed. Muyang, who dangerously avoided his attack, rolled on the floor before he got up. I can read everything. It seems like you can't use that attack twice. It must be disappointing. Olonis mocked him as he held his half-amputated left shoulder. As if Muyang wasted his first and last chance. Olonis wasn't completely wrong. However, Muyang wasn't disappointed at all. It's enough. The injury Anguish caused was hard to recover. The truth was that Olonis' injury wasn't recovering. Vitality was spurting out and was continuously being absorbed into Muyang. From the beginning, Muyang was just after wounding him first. It will be a long fight. It was fight he needed to fight for the long run. Muyang and Olonis' skills weren't that greatly different. However, Olonis was quite exhausted and allowed Muyang to attack him. All that was left was time. The time for him to collapse. Thump. Rumble. As Olonis fiercely attacked Muyang with his long nails, Muyang calmly blocked his attacks and summoned Merdudin. Stop his movements. Murloc King Merdudin appeared with a few thousand specters. After Muyang ordered him, Merdudin ground his teeth as he looked at Olonis. Devil. The one that I hate most. After being tricked by demon god Dantalion, Merdudin harbored a strong hatred against demons and demon gods alike. Even if he was a slave, there was no way for Devil Olonis to look good in Merdudin's eyes. Instantly, under Merdudin's command, thousands of specters restricted Olonis' movements. Ka. Olonis bit his lips as his movement instantly became dull and his body didn't listen to him. The third eye opened halfway and started to indiscriminately shoot out beams. Thump. Thump. Crush. No one can stop me. His eye became redder. Small veins bulged and his whole body slowly bloated up. All the hands that originally rose from the floor were absorbed into Olonis' body. In time, huge horns appeared on both sides of his forehead and wings sprouted from his back. Form of the devil. That was his true devil form. They would normally go around in similar forms to other species, but when they began to fight, they would sometimes transform like this. And devils who changed into a form of a devil earned destructive power beyond one's imaginations. Of course, not all devils could change into their true form. Only a few chosen devils could have a true form, and Olonis seemed to be one of those chosen devils. He can't maintain it for long. However, there weren't many devils who could maintain the form of the devil for a long time. Unless they were a demon king or a demon god, at most they could maintain it for about 10 minutes. When the change is lifted, the rebound will also be big. It meant that Muyang could win if he killed time. The problem was that it was really hard to endure for that period of time. Olonis, who finished transforming into the form of the devil, let out his breath and spoke. I will kill you most painfully. You shouldn't have offended me. Olonis fluttered his wings and declared to Muyang. Muyang took a big breath. Thump. When he closed his eyes and reopened them, something deep inside, Azura Path, responded. His heart beat violently. Azura Path wants his body. It was unexpected. However, something in Azura Path wanted the current Olonis form. Muyang instinctively knew that this something was one of the rulers of Azura Path. Do you want him? Thump, thump, thump. Muyang's whole body shivered. A supremely evil spirit that wanted the form of the devil was slowly opening its eyes. Evil spirit predator. is acknowledging Muyang, the evil spirit predator. Muyang had already conquered a significant part of Azura Path by using Merdudin, and when a special condition was added, the evil spirit predator seemed to have awakened and acknowledged Muyang. I will accept. Muyang nodded his head. At the same time, blaze. The few thousands of specters Muyang released, all gathered inside his body. This strength, isn't it the strength of the predator? Merdudin's eyes widened. Merdudin also knew of the few sovereigns in Azura Path. However, it seemed like he never in the world expected that one of them would lend Muyang their strength. Soon a skull-shaped spirit was casted behind Muyang's back. The old dwarf Kalmo couldn't take his eyes off the fight for even a second. While placing his hands together, he concentrated all his nerves on Muyang and Olonis's fight. I can't believe it. He used acceleration. Beside Kalmu, the 4 humans including Bug were with him. They were also able to reach the second floor by winning on a roll, but the reason why they continued even though they could leave the arena was only to watch this fight. They were curious as to how well Muyang was going to fight against Olonis, who sliced off their comrade's arm. But as the fight began, Muyang used acceleration to successfully injuring Olonis. Please, please. Kalmu felt his helplessness as he could only pray. However, it was true that he felt an odd pleasure whenever Muyang pressed Olonis with the equipment he touched upon. Sun's revenge. If he could kill Olonis, he would do anything. Ah. However, Kalmu strongly bit his lips after seeing Olonis transform into the form of the devil. He never thought Olonis was a devil that had the form. Normally, it was only possible for high-rank devils. Even though Olonis' skills were exceptional, Kalmu couldn't say he was a high rank. That was why he didn't even think about it. If he was transformed, Muyang's winning ratio would drastically decrease. When they were finally able to fight on an equal level, the tables were turned at once. Crushed to death. Even if the duration was short, it was still possible to crush his opponent as long as a gap was created. Unless Olonis was an idiot, he would try to end the fight as quickly as he could. And Muyang didn't have any moves to stop him. Everyone thought that. Withdraw. I can feel the strong strength of a curse. The priest spoke. Afterwards, he kneeled and repeated the name of Soon. As a cloud was summoned and surrounded the people around them, a strong curse blew out in waves with Muyang at the center. Thwomp. Thwomp. A half-transparent and enormous skull soared up behind Muyang. Very quickly, a few monsters that were watching the fight from the stand collapsed onto the floor. They were unable to withstand the aftermath of the curse. What exactly is that skull? Bug asked the priest. The priest barely answered while he was dripping with sweat. I'm not sure. However, I am certain that it is a denied existence that should not exist in this world. Something that normally has to be sealed in abyss. The abyss. It's a place where the gods seal up evil spirits. Even when he's not completely exposed, he still has this much presence. I'm truly curious as to how a Dakibi is able to draw out that sort of evil spirit from the abyss. The eyes of the priest were shaking as it looked at the evil spirit predator. An existence inside the abyss was awakened. The Dakibi woke it. On top of that, the existence from the abyss was now helping the Dakibi. Something unbelievable was happening. Evil spirits locked in the abyss hated and wanted to destroy everything. Help. They didn't have that kind of sense. That was why they were sealed by the gods. Thump. Olonis and Muyang collided. However, whoever watched them could tell Olonis' urgency from his movements. Muyang didn't yield an inch. It seemed like he was at a disadvantage for a second, but they were back to being equal opponents. However, Olonis' movements resembled a frantic last-ditch effort. That was also the final struggle dependent on time. And after 10 minutes had passed, the form of the devil was lifted and Olonis returned to his original state. What the hell are you? A strength that my eye can't read, it's not possible. Olonis shouted. Muyang lifted his hand with an emotionless face. Anguish pierced Olonis' heart. As Muyang took out Anguish, Olonist's body drooped. However, it wasn't the end yet. At the same time, tears of blood suddenly started to pour from Olonist's third eye. Self-destruction. As he knitted his brows, the evil spirit predator acted faster than Muyang. As it approached, permeating into Olonist's body, bloody tears stopped flowing down his third eye. But, with a small explosive, Olonist lowered his head. However, it seemed like it was late. The brain self-exploded. TSK. He clicked his tongue lightly. Like this, even if he was to make an undead, he couldn't collect the information he wanted. The situation with the demon gods factions and Gremry's position, there were so many things he wanted to ask, but before he had the chance, the situation had ended. As he turned his head, the evil spirit predator looked down on Muyang. You want me to use the Art of Death skill? Even if it stopped his self-destruction, it seemed like it couldn't force itself into the body and take control of it. Muyang nodded his head and used the Art of Death skill. At that moment, the evil spirit predator was absorbed into Olonist's body. Plus completely autonomic individual, does not listen to orders. Plus boundless development, it develops on its own. Plus qualification to be a sovereign, it can have its own territory and order soldiers. A black cape fluttered as it held a thick long sword. Muyang could only be greatly surprised by the finished product. A Death Knight. It was a top-class undead that even liches only had one of. The evil spirit predator that occupied Olonist's body looked at Muyang. Do you want anything? He felt as though it was asking him this. Cerberus. Only one thing came to Muyang's mind. He believed it was best to prepare the 3 things needed and put Cerberus to sleep, but if the Death Knight appeared, the story changed. Something no one could challenge. It seemed possible to even hunt the Cerberus. That wasn't the end. The Art of Death skill that stagnated after it had reached C rank rose a rank. By having one of the sovereigns of Azura path come out, the conquest rate greatly increased. However, there was definitely something strange. Even though he used the Art of Death skill to create him, orders didn't work on it. It was also surprising that he could develop on his own and become a sovereign. However, although he might have had a slight goodwill towards Muyang, he didn't seem like he would forever follow him. A king is an independent entity. As if he answered Muyang's question, the evil spirit predator spoke. Now that he looked at him, it seemed like he could talk. I do thank you for releasing me. In return, I will help you with one thing. However, you cannot tie me down. It meant that he wasn't planning to follow him from the beginning. Simply looking at their stats, the level difference between the evil spirit predator and Muyang was like the difference between heaven and earth. It would be illogical to attack. Even if Muyang had a lot of experience and avoided a face-to-face confrontation with him, he wouldn't be able to do anything. However, the evil spirit predator knew one thing but not the other. He didn't seem to know that Muyang held his life in the palm of his hand. Since he had earned a physical body in this life through Muyang. The black soul appeared above the evil spirit predator. It was an indicator that soul exploitation was possible. I don't need an undead that doesn't follow me. As Muyang coldly spoke, the evil spirit predator smashed the ground once with his sword. Then what are you going to do? A king doesn't follow anyone. I have escaped the abyss and am now going to be a king in this world. He consistently showed a domineering attitude as if he was weary of Muyang. Muyang stretched his hand. As he held the black soul in his hand, the expression of the evil spirit predator hardened. Wait. How can a human see my soul and hold it? If I want to, I can get rid of it. Impossible. Unless your soul is a higher rank than mine, it would be impossible. We can check if it is impossible or not. He was a bit curious. If he were to exploit the soul of an undead at the level of a Death Knight, how fast would his development be? The evil spirit predator became serious. Something that couldn't happen transpired almost naturally. A sovereign that ruled over a few thousand specters. There was no way for a human soul to be of a higher level than his soul. However, it was a situation where one challenge could end everything. It meant that the Death Lord's existence was at a level higher than the evil spirit predator, and since soul exploitation was active, if Muyang made his mind, he could get rid of evil spirit predator's soul. After realizing this, the evil spirit predator changed his attitude. I will help you. For taking me out of the abyss, I will volunteer to help you for 30 days. He changed his words from a single help to 30 days of volunteering. He did yield a bit in this matter. If Muyang was to take advantage of him forever, he would resist from the start. But it wasn't like he was going to just accept his conditions. Muyang shook his head. 90 days. 60 days. No longer than that. I need to quickly raise my power as soon as possible. I need to show dignity in order to prove my qualifications to be the sovereign of few thousand souls. It seemed like he had reasons of his own. Muyang decided to accept his offer. If the evil spirit predator was truly planning on becoming a king, it wasn't bad to strengthen his relationship with him. If he could control a top-ranked entity for 60 days, it would be a great help to his development. Since it wasn't like there were any limitations like he had with the Hell Horse. However, you must listen to what I say. I understand. The evil spirit predator agreed. As Muyang started to move, someone all of a sudden stopped in front of him. Kalmu. With a flushed expression, he came up and alternately looked at Muyang and evil spirit predator. What happened to Olonis? He's dead. However, he is. It's a different soul in charge of Olonis' body. Kalmua's eyes widened. However, he didn't seem to fully believe in this truth. Muyang took out and held Olonis' soul that was absorbed into Azura Path. This is Olonis' soul. If you want it, I will give it to you. It would be possible to trap him in some kind of equipment and make him suffer for eternity. Kalmua gulped his saliva and then spoke. Then is it possible to free my boy's soul? Free. My boy died by Olonis and is suffering as he can't be freed even after his death. Kalmua's expression seemed desperate. However, Muyang didn't really have a way. After a bit of thought, he moved his gaze to the evil spirit predator who nodded his head. I guess you're talking about the souls that devil guy used as slaves. Find him yourself. The evil spirit predator stomped his foot. Thump. With that sound, the ground split and a few thousand souls from below soared upwards. In time, those souls then took form. With their appearance from when they were alive, with no focus, they stood behind the evil spirit predator. That was the authority of the evil spirit predator. It seemed like he could grant forms to their souls and make them fight. Amazing. Muyang inwardly admired him. The Death Lord's existence might be higher than the evil spirit predator, but Muyang couldn't completely use his strength. For now, he was far behind the evil spirit predator in terms of handling the undead and specters. Kalmu looked around to find his son. How long has it been? Ah! With an exclamation, Kalmu ran. And he wailed in front of a dwarf child. Wawawa! Kalamo, my child. Why are you here being all cold? Kalmu held both shoulders of the child and sighed while he kneeled. Your father is at fault. I shouldn't have entered this place even if it was out of curiosity. Think ill of me. Self-blame was mixed in. The evil spirit predator who just watched them started to speak. If you want, I can place his soul in a new body. Kalmu pricked his ears. It was no different than the devil's whisper. However, in time he shook his head. I'm okay. I don't want my child to suffer any more than this. He didn't act irrationally after being blinded by affection. Kalmu would also know that it would be impossible without a price. And it wasn't like his son would come back to life just because his soul was placed inside a new body. A completely different result would appear. Since the soul and body were interlinked, a side effect might appear or an emotionless puppet might be created when a soul was placed inside another body. In sense, Kalmua's current decision was wise. Release him. As Muyang spoke, the evil spirit predator shook his hand. Then the appearance of the child started to become blurry. The soul returned to the place where it was supposed to be. Kalamo. Ah, Kalamo. Thump. A moment later, due to the complete disappearance of the child, Kalmua's body fell to the ground. Muyang suddenly became curious and asked, "Do you know where the souls go?" "No one knows besides the Creator. They say that they are reborn." Reborn. It didn't seem like the evil spirit predator knew the details. "I did die. After getting rid of the forest of death, Muyang died once. Afterwards he traveled back in time, but in this world there was clearly the existence of souls. After his death, his soul definitely left his body. Although he wasn't self-aware, wouldn't there have been another process for him to return to the past?" Muyang shrugged his shoulders. It was something he couldn't know unless he became a god. After Kalmu blankly stared into the distance, being lost in thought, he regained his mind and walked up to Muyang. After wiping his tears with his hands, he bit his lips before he spoke. "Thank you. Until I die, I will forever follow you." Fortunately, Kalmu wasn't just suicidal. He was clearly remembering their promise. "Please do." Muyang nodded his head before leaving the arena. Since he no longer needed a strategy to defeat the Cerberus, it was useless for him to collect more ons. That was why Muyang used the rest of his ons to get all sorts of slaves. Of course, he had a standard. He only chose the species that had rationality and could use their head. This was how he was able to get close to 2,000 slaves until he became the final winner of the first floor. At the same time, he logged the most wins. 227 wins, 0 draw, 0 loss. It was the result of him stealing the continuous wins from Victor effect. Muyang, no name. 227 wins. Wushin 201 wins. Ohosuki Yuka, 167 wins. Lushin and Ohosuki Yuka. Both were people Muyang was familiar with. Fighting King Lushin and the Queen of Ninjas, Ohosuki Yuka. There was no way that Muyang would not know them. Moments later, a different message appeared in front of him. A huge door was behind the first floor arena. Afterwards, the door opened and a huge three-headed monster showed itself. Its size was well above 10 m. Each of the three heads had a different ability. Normally, he wouldn't have chosen to fight. However, with the existence of the evil spirit predator, conditions allowed him to fight. It's quite a decent mount. The evil spirit predator looked at the Cerberus and rubbed his chin. Muyang knitted his eyebrows for a moment before he relented. It's harder to suppress it than to kill it. The trial was made to receive an assessment depending on the context. If he was to suppress it, he would receive a good assessment. Let's begin. Swoosh. Anguish and the wicked god's sword rang. Wuhi was very excited as she flapped her wings in the air. Look. Wuhi said so, right? My husband will take care of very thing. Arg. The fat fairy Pant groaned. His first intention was to show Wuhi a reputable trial to win her heart, but Wuhi was already in love with another person. That was why he tried to interfere by placing a bounty on his head, but that Dakibi didn't stop and continued to crazily advance. On top of that, he made a death knight and was now attacking Cerberus. Wuhi. My husband is so amazing. He isn't using the strategy Wuhi told him and is just attacking it. The strategy you told him? Instantly, Wuhi realized her mistake and pretended she didn't hear him. Husband. Win. While looking at her, Pant let out a deep sigh. A Dakibi and a fairy could never be a good match, but what could he do when she is already this into him? It didn't seem like there was a way to turn her heart around. That was why he looked at Cerberus with a bit of hope. How could a Dakibi win against a Cerberus? He instead wanted the Dakibi to die in his fight with Cerberus. He believed that Wuhi would then regain her senses and look at him. However, it was all a mere false hope. Instead of the Dakibi, the death knight that the Dakibi made was the problem. He really did fly around and trample on Cerberus. In the end, he even succeeded in taming Cerberus. Pant. Impossible. Taming works on a Cerberus. Pant let out a scream. It was impossible for a monster like Cerberus to be tamed. However, that Death Knight succeeded. The Death Knight got on Cerberus's back and started to use it however he wanted. The natural ability of the Death Knight to find a mount, and the authority of the evil spirit predator combined allowed even the taming of a Cerberus to be possible. Pant's chin naturally dropped, and as Muyang chose a reward past the door, the arena started to collapse. Rumble. It meant that the trial of the arena had ended. Afterwards, as everything collapsed, the box of trial distorted and the original world became visible. What is that? Wu He, who returned back to the original world, tilted her head as she looked up the sky. A particularly red star was in the sky. The combination of a few hundred or even a few thousand stars wouldn't have been brighter than that star. A totally pure star that shined as if it would swallow up everything. Wu He, who was carried away by the purity, blankly stared at the star and then moved her gaze back to Muyang. It was because the red star gave her a similar feeling to Muyang for some reason. And Wu He's thoughts were somewhat true. A red star that appeared in the highest place. That was the star of the Absolute. A Cerberus was a top-ranked monster that could handle water, fire, and lightning. However, its opponent was bad. Death Knights were undead monsters that were acknowledged to have no rivals. It was comparable to a lich, and a well-made Death Knight was known to have the destructiveness of a dragon. To be exact, the evil spirit predator was not at that level. However, he was able to develop boundlessly and had the qualifications to be a sovereign. That meant, in some ways, the evil spirit predator was better. Even during the fight with the Cerberus, the evil spirit predator continued to get stronger. After a few hours of fighting, he was able to oppress it and designated it as a mount. Amazing. Muyang never thought he would be able to tame a Cerberus. What he was half in doubt about became true. A Cerberus was quite lacking compared to a magical dragon, but it was still a top-rank monster. Monsters that were very small in number but could change the flow of the battle were known as top-ranked monsters among the people. A Death Knight and now a Cerberus, a walking nuclear bomb, was basically created. Starlight. Muyang tilted his head. On top of his hand, a key that emitted a yellow light appeared. However, he had never heard of the present he received. As he concentrates on it, information about the key appeared. Name, Starlight. Rank, none. Classification, functional type. Endurance, none. Effect, a key that allows you to handle Starlight. Asterisk, depending on the star you possess, a different ability will be activated. Star of the Absolute. When it is up in the sky, you can declare Absolute's territory. Absolute's territory, while the light is in reach, the enemies inside it are weakened. The toughness effect will be greatly reduced. Asterisk, depending on the number of stars you possess, the ability increases. Star of the Absolute. All stats plus 10. Asterisk, Star Looter, authority. When you suppress a star holder, you can forcefully steal the opponent's star. Muyang's gaze didn't leave the key for a while. Starlight. Like the name, it was a word with endless possibilities. Stars are presents given only to special existences. There were other occasions where this happened. Heroes were those who were known to receive callings from stars. With the appearance of these people, a special star appeared in the sky. From the appearance of a star, the people were able to know that a great existence had arisen. And Muyang became one of those people. On top of that, he even had the authority to steal other stars. Of course, the star he talked about weren't only given to heroes. The star appeared as a symbol of those who were incomparable to others. If he could steal all the stars, the stolen star instantly became his power. Depending on the star, the ability differentiated, so the starlight could be considered potential itself. The Queen of the Moon and the Star. She was different from the Masters of Darkness who have appeared until now. It was a name he saw for the first time. It meant the person wasn't actively participating in Muyang's evaluation and for some reason he didn't know of, suddenly decided to change their mind. Death Lord, Shadow Lord, the ruler of the afterlife, the Spirit Sovereign, the Star of 12 Zodiacs, Kingslayer, and the Queen of the Moon and the Star. With this, Muyang knew of 7 Masters of Darkness. The other 4 were still under a veil. Until when are you going to just stand there blankly? The evil spirit predator who got on the Cerberus spoke. Muyang nodded before putting in the key. The thing Olonis continuously re-challenged and searched for is beyond that door. A total of 7 times. There was something he wanted to get even by participating in the arena 7 times. And Muyang was planning to find out what it was. Muyang moved and passed the huge door. He entered the huge door, but inside it not a lot of things were seen. To be exact, there were only 3 books. And were written on each. I can only choose one from these. Muyang rubbed his chin. Normally you could only choose one of these limited rewards. Probably something different would happen when he chooses one. There was no relationship with the order of the people who entered. Just one. He needed to be careful. Rewards that are given in the form of books are normally skills or treasure maps. He thought carefully. By looking at their titles, they didn't seem to be a skill. Then would they be a treasure map? What Olonis wanted. There was a limit in knowing their titles. That was why he changed his focus to Olonis. Although he was a slave devil, it seemed like his sense of loyalty towards Visego was still the same. On the other hand, since he had the pride of devils, he must have been sad that he had become a slave. He would have tried to be free from the slave status, and to do that he needed to achieve something that would have been a direct help to the demon god Visego. Call of the Devil. Muyang selected the book that was in the middle. His reason was simple. Angel of Retrogression. There are no angels in the underworld. History of Twilight? It was most likely to be a story about the elves that opened the Twilight era. There were stories about the underworld that he occasionally found when he looked through old books. This was also no different for humans and the demon gods. If there were at least some possibilities, it would only be the call of the devil. However, when he tried to open the book, it wouldn't budge. High-ranked devil, you say? From just these messages he could tell that this item was uncommon. He was really curious about the content inside, but for now he left it alone. Since he would meet a high-ranked devil one day. Muyang had become a lord who owned a territory in the demon god's territory. As he continued to increase his territory and strengthened his control, another devil around it would inevitably react to his territory. Suddenly the arena shook. The rest of the 2 novels disappeared as if they evaporated. As he looked around, cracks appeared on the rocks as they fell and turned to dust. At the same time, Muyang's body started to fade. When he opened his eyes again, he was outside of the box of trial. He returned back to the place where he first entered. However, there were things that definitely changed. First, the cave collapsed. To be exact, there was a pile of rocks. And the surrounding was filled with the presence of slaves. A surprising number of 2,000 slaves all stood there while they looked at Muyang with an odd expression. The evil spirit predator who was riding on the Cerberus looked at this scene with great interest. He was also someone who was trying to become a king. It was obvious he was interested in Muyang's actions, as he wanted to be a sovereign in the current world and not the Azura path where he ordered the specters. A star, a real star, is in the sky. However, before handling them, he first looked at the sky. There was a particularly red star among the numerous stars in the black night sky. Muyang instinctively knew that that was his star. Muyang had killed a few who had their own star, but never did he ever earn a star for himself. Emotions he couldn't explain overflowed. Muyang considered this feeling as being moved, or happiness. An emotion that he never really felt and believed was already dead, was slowly surfacing. He shook his head before he looked around again. Follow me. We will go to my territory. And slowly he started to move. There was no better place for all the different types of species to live in besides his own territory. While he was vacant, his territory developed astoundingly. 20,000 Dakibis were pioneering the territory and the humans were spreading seeds. In the underworld, most crops wouldn't grow. However, in Muyang's territory, they would grow as long as they gave them a good amount of water. Not too long after, a few messages appeared. A higher rank and a castle. It brought him to partake in his activities as a lord. As Muyang stepped into his territory, the first to greet him was Baltan and Siohan. Both kneeled in front of him with determined eyes. Dirum, please accept our fight. Greetings, Lord. However, the Duaxini Siohan spoke in quite a worked-up voice while Baltan spoke in quite a calm voice. From the beginning, since Baltan was an undead, his emotions were swayed. However, he had determination. It was a fight with the pride of humans and Dakibis on the line. They were never going to be careless about it. However, Myung shook his head. First, make space to receive them. The fight can start after. 2,000 slaves stood behind Myung. Elf, beast, dwarf, etc. Over 100 different species were gathered, but their conditions didn't seem to be all that great. They were suffering from malnutrition, all kinds of injuries, and filled with vague fear. They needed a place to receive them. I will guide them. Follow me. Irene, who lightly walked towards them, stood in between Baltan and Siohan. While Baltan and Siohan didn't easily move as they were busy studying each other's face, Irene, who realized her exact role, stepped up. Unlike before, she smiled refreshingly and led the slaves. And Kalmu spoke as he saw numerous Dakibis from afar. Is this my master's land? It is. There should be many things I need to do. Kalmu slightly smiled. He probably said it after looking at the buildings. There was enough work for the dwarves. Myung nodded as he walked forward. After organizing the territory, I will go find the 3 Pickaxe Sack Alliance. He needed to do the things in the proper order. At the same time, the leaders of large organizations looked up in the sky. They focused on the particularly red star in the sky. An appearance of a new star always made everyone nervous. If they got it, the star would provide them with strength for them to leap up, and if they didn't, it would be a huge hindrance that would make them ground their teeth. The leaders of the large organizations all got up at the same time. What is the name of that star? Among the recruiters, there were some that studied stars. Large organizations would have at least one research lab, and they would study the existing stars to estimate the time the gates would open or when an unexpected situation would occur. There were some research labs that read signs that something would happen in 10 years from now, but they were not certain what that was yet. Anyhow, an appearance of a new star was also something they needed to study. And the name of the star could be easily figured out. The Star of the Absolute. That's what it's called. The Star of the Absolute? They could only knit their brows after hearing the title. How could a name be so arrogant? No one could discuss the Absolute. It was the same for those that were in the top 10 strongest human beings. The title of Absolute had that much weight. But a star related to that title was up in the sky. Find it. Find who the owner of the star is. You must find it faster than anyone else. All the organizations, small or big, started to act. Their goal was one thing: to find the owner of the Star of the Absolute. However, no one could produce any results. It was an obvious thing. The place they were in was humanity's territory. How could they find Myung, who was increasing his influence in the demon god's territory? It was impossible for different types of species to live harmoniously from the beginning. That was why it was necessary to divide areas and completely acknowledge each of their territories. Fortunately, the one who placed great influence on the others was Kalmu. He already knew different forms of buildings depending on the species and reconstructed them outstandingly. It took around 2 months for the open land to develop into territory-like form. It was truly a busy time where everyone had to rest in places with low walls. A castle of Myung was also built rather well. It was still incomparable to other castles in other large cities, but it was a place where the dwarf skills were beautifully displayed. The structure of the castle and its magnificence were incomparable to any other. Lords are people who rule over others. Myung went up the top of the castle and looked down. Never in the world did he think that he would seriously ponder about this position. Even in the beginning, didn't he think of it as a position that he would just pass by? However, it was different now. Presently, there was a reason for him to widen his territory and become a great lord. Demon god of Gremory. I need to prove myself of that position. To go to the next step, he needed to develop his territory above a duchy. That meant when his territory became so large that it would bother other demons with territories, a new problem would appear. And besides the qualifications of a demon king, Muyang's doubts increased. Demon gods' ecology and what happened before the Great Calamity. If he could just find out about them, he might be able to change the future. Dear I think you need to come out for a second. Just then Siohan ran with cold sweat running down his back. What's wrong? As Muyang asked, Siohan kneeled before he replied. Fire tars came down. Fire tars. Yes, it seems like when we were expanding our territory we slightly trespassed their territory. If we continued like this, it seemed like there was going to be an all-out war. So, fire tars were giants. They were top-ranked predators and were monsters that destroyed everything. If they crossed the territory of the fire tars, who were the main culprit of ecological destruction, things would not end easily. Fire tars are divided into tribes. Muyang thought of Ogre. He was successful in solving the problem about the Pum tree and winning his favor, but the tribe Ogre was the vice chieftain of was located quite far from this place. That meant it was highly likely that another fire tar tribe was nearby. Muyang knitted his brows. Normal Dakibis were unable to win against the fire tars. It was the same even if Duaxinus were to face them. From the start their chemistry was very bad. The fire tars were able to handle fire and naturally fires were a type of fear to living things. I understand. Muyang nodded his head and then turned his body. To somewhat settle the dispute it seemed like he needed to move. A few thousand Dakibis felt their body trembling. Though he had actively hunted monsters and increased his territory up until now, no matter how great his numbers are, in front of the fire tars, they were like mice in front of cats. Only about 10 fire tars looked at the Dakibis with a frown on their face. There were already dead corpses of Dakibi rolling around. It seemed as if the fire tars had killed them to be set as examples of sinners. Muyang looked at the scene and inwardly clicked his tongue. It doesn't seem like their goal is to wipe everyone here. If that was their plan, they would have annihilated a few thousand Dakibis without mercy. Muyang knew very well that fire tars were cruel massacres. And as expected, they were fire tars he never saw. They were completely different tribe than the ogre he was familiar with. Are you the king of these Dakibis? Thump. Among the fire tars, the one that seemed to be the leader stood in front of Muyang. He tried to scare Muyang with his threatening footsteps, but Muyang didn't even budge. 1. He realistically calculated. He came to a conclusion that he could take one as a result. If a few thousand Dakibis assembled with Muyang and reinforcements arrived, there would be casualties, but it wasn't impossible to catch 10 fire tars. It meant he had nothing to lose. If the fire tars had a brain, they wouldn't try to have an all-out war. Most of all, since they killed Dakibis just as examples, they probably wanted something else. That's right. As Muyang nodded, the fire tar spoke. Your Dakibis trespassed our territory. Normally it was our rule to kill them all, but we didn't. Do you know why? Are you wanting a deal? We seem to speak the same language. You're right. We know that you have developed this land and made a castle. Likewise, I want you to build a castle for us, fire tars. Then I will let go of what has happened. Muyang inwardly snorted. The reason why they didn't invade and wanted another one built was because the walls and structure was too small for the fire tars. However, it was utter nonsense. Even with tens of thousands of Dakibis and everyone joined together, he didn't know how long it would take to build a castle the fire tars would be satisfied with. For them to ask him to complete it was no different from asking them to become their slaves. This is why dwarves hid underground. Dwarves were born to be experts in architecture. However, since their fighting power were terrible, they were used by all kinds of monsters and then died off. They could only live by hiding if they didn't want to be used by others. Likewise, it was like having flies come nearby wanting the castle Muyang had made. Fire tars liked to hunt but hated to build anything. Swoosh. Muyang took out Anguish and his wicked god sword. I request for a duel. If you win, I will make you a castle, but if I win, get lost. It was the most reasonable and rational way. The fire tars spoke noisily. They had never thought that he wouldn't back down and fight back like this, since all Dakibis would feel fear against the fire tars. However, Muyang was an exception. "All right, daring fellow, I will make you regret it." One of the 10 fire tars, the one that seemed to be their leader, took out a huge spear from his back. Muyang shrugged his shoulders and faced the fire tar. "This is fine." He knew a problem like this would happen eventually. It was impossible to ravage the demon god's territory with only 20,000 Dakibis. If it wasn't now, he would have faced a true predator in time. It would be easier to think that it has been moved forward. Although it would have been impossible if it was the past. Muyang calmed himself. Compared to when he first arrived in the demon god's territory, his current strength was incomparable. Now if he displayed his full strength, he could do something about one fire tar. Blase. The fire tar burned his flames more intensely. Blaze. Muyang also activated his cry of fire as he grinned. Flames were bigger than fire tars. The fire tar's expression was solid. Muyang showed them that they weren't the only ones that could handle fire and really got on their nerves. On top of that, territory proclamation. The sky became slightly darker, and from afar, a red star started to shine. There was no need to differentiate between night and day, since the red star burned fiercely in the sky no matter if it was night or day. "You strange tricks. But you still can't beat me." Hush. The spear dug up the ground. Muyang started to move by riding the spear shaft. It wasn't possible to win? That wasn't something he had heard before. But the ones that said those words had all died by Muyang's hand. Thump. The fire tar's upper body fell to the floor. The fight was settled about 30 minutes later. Everyone's eyes widened. Without a distinction between fire tars and Dakibis. There was no Dakibi that could win against a fire tar one-on-one. This was the same for Duaxinus. "Ah, dear Dear To the one that claimed the territory of the fire tars, the Dakibis felt a surge, kneeled, and idolized him further. Muyang, who didn't care what they were doing, went up to the fire tar who fell to the floor and placed anguish by his neck before he spoke carefreely. "The win has been decided. If you are going to continue, I will slice your neck like this. Kill me. I can't bear this humiliation." Puck. Slash. There was no mercy. Muyang coldly stabbed the fire tar's neck and twisted it. He completely detached his head and then looked at the rest of the 9 fire tars. "What are you going to do now? Are you going to take back on your promise?" The fire tars looked at each other in disgust. In time, one of them nodded his head and took the head and the body of the dead fire tar. "Like we promised, we will let you pass for today." "Like you promised? I specifically told you to get lost." The fire tars didn't reply. Instead, they slowly backed away and made distance with Muyang. Then Siohan approached. Now all the Dakibis saw that fire tars are no longer an opponent to be feared upon. "Please allow me to track them down." "Leave them." However, Muyang shook his head. Even if there were only 9, they were still equal to thousands of Dakibis. Nay dash. From afar he heard a horse cry. It was the hell horse. If it was the hell horse, it could easily cook up 9 fire tars. However, he only had 2 chances left. He needed to use them more carefully, and even if he killed those 9 fire tars, it would not end there. Instead, it was best to prepare with the time on hand. They will invade some time later on. The fire tars showed no signs that they were just going to back off. It was a big mistake to think of them as ogre in the past. It was a mistake to think of them as warriors that knew of their honor. Only Ogre and his tribe were friendly. Of course, he wasn't planning to back away like this. Muyang's eyes sunk deeply. It was as expected. Exactly 4 days later, the fire tars invaded their territory and entered. Their numbers were exactly 50. "Dakibis, I will give you one last chance. If you want to live, hand over your king." All 50 fire tars were holding a weapon. They had the strength to raise the territory. Narrow-minded bastards. Without a change in your facial color, you calmly speak a lie, huh? The Dakibis who faced them started to mumble with each other. Was a Dakibi of prophecy. Even if they were to be annihilated, there was no way they would pass over Muyang to the fire tars. However, it was also true that the results were clear. Even if 20,000 Dakibis gathered, they couldn't win against 50 fire tars. The fire tars were that much of a top predator. Muyang took out Anguish and Wicked God's sword and passed by these Dakibis. Dear you don't have to come forward. He's right. Leave this place to us. Muyang coldly spoke. Move. All the Dakibis closed their mouth after Muyang's word. However, it was necessary. Muyang could only stand up in this current situation. You voluntarily showed up. Do you change your mind now? It was probably the chieftain. A fire tar larger than other fire tars spoke to Muyang. I will give you one last chance. Get lost. Muyang replied calmly. The fire tar chieftain became furious. There is no victory for you guys. If you continue, you would only be massacred indiscriminately. I only let you guys live because I looked highly at your handcraftship. There is no victory. That's what I have to say. Muyang's expression didn't change. Afterwards, Muyang looked at afar and lifted up a side of his lips. You guys are greatly mistaken us. Do you think we just made up of Dakibis? What are you talking about? The chieftain was doubtful and spoke, but Muyang didn't reply. However, his gaze was still looking at afar. He could sense a trace of undead Baltan not too far from this place. Thump, thump, thump. Soon, chieftain could understand the meaning behind Muyang's word. From afar, Baltan Siohan and a huge fire tar was running towards them. Muyang knew very well of the fire tar who was approaching them. Ogre. Perhaps the only great warrior who knows of Muyang's true identity had appeared. Muyang laughed quietly. He made Baltan and Siohan go to Ogre and ask for his help, but there was honestly only a 50-50 chance. Compared to other fire tars, he was definitely someone who knew honor and friendship. However, since Ogre had already helped him once, Muyang wasn't sure if he would help him a second time. However, Ogre dropped whatever he was doing and ran to help Muyang. It seemed the help Muyang gave in solving the problem with the pum tree was still effective. Due to Ogre who suddenly appeared, the expression of the fire tar chieftain could only harden. Stop the fight, Graham. After arriving at the battlefield, Ogre took out his spear and spoke. Then the fire tar chieftain called Graham looked at Ogre and shook his head. Isn't it Ogre, the vice chieftain of the Thornbush tribe? But for what reason are you here? Your tribe has already moved from here quite a while ago. Graham squinted, as if he couldn't understand why on earth Ogre would show up. However, it couldn't be helped. It wouldn't be easy to think that a fire tar, known to be a fire warrior, would come all the way here to help a mere Dakibi. Even more, Ogre was the vice chieftain of a tribe. And he was the vice chieftain of the strongest tribe near this area. Ogre spoke briskly. The small Dakibi in front of you is our savior. Our savior. Graham's expression hardened even further. He said we not. It meant that the entire Thornbush tribe regarded the one Dakibi as their savior. This was much harder for Graham to understand. Graham didn't know that Muyang solved the chronic problem regarding the pum tree. However, Ogre wasn't planning on explaining step by step to help him understand. If you decide to persecute our savior, I will face you with my spear. Ogre twirled his huge spear. The fire on his body moved to the spear and showed his gallant spirit to those all around him. It was much stronger than the flames of any other fire tars currently here. Still, he couldn't hastily move first. The Thornbush tribe was a huge group that monopolized the pum tree. From the fire tar groups nearby, it could only be one that stood out the most. And among them, the vice chieftain and the chieftain could easily fight against a top-ranked monster. The fire tars who surpassed the limits of fire tars. The high ranks and the top ranks difference was substantial. And even among the top rank, their difference was even greater. The top-ranked species were greatly divided into 5 stages, and Ogre was definitely strong to be able to be in the second stage. It's the reason why others didn't trespass fire tar's territory. Fire tars were overall considered as high-rank monsters, but strong, top-ranked fire tars appeared from time to time that others didn't disturb them. Also, among the top class, if they surpassed the 5th stage, they were called the transcendental beings, but it was rare for a normal monster that wasn't a demon king or a demon god to be part of that group. Magical dragons with a name or legendary monsters might be part of the transcendental beings. It would be the same if they were to consider humans. Normally, they said top 10 humans were transcendental beings, but strictly saying, they were in the middle of transcendental beings and the 5th stage of the top rank. This was just a ranking system which humans made, and for this reason, it was understandable that they treated humans to be a higher rank than monsters. Either way, Ogre was a strong individual included in the top rank, and if anyone was to fight with him, they would be harmed considerably. Ogre, even though you are strong, do you think you could deal with all of us? However, Graham didn't fall back. It was also impossible for Ogre to handle all 50 fire tars alone. It would be the same if he was to combine strength with Dakibi's. On the contrary, he was about to explode. The veins in Graham's forehead and neck bulged. How much did they disregard him to send just Ogre? It was at that moment. Myung coldly spoke as he smiled coldly. How long are you going to just watch? The situation is getting interesting. Thump. The evil spirit predator showed up riding the Cerberus up above the sky. Originally, the Cerberus didn't have the ability to fly, but after the evil spirit predator added his authority to his ride, an ability it didn't have has been added. On both sides of Cerberus, the wings made out of evil spirit soared out. The Dakibis started to become noisy. That is Cerberus? Why would that kind of monster show up all of a sudden? Why? The situation occurred as no Dakibi beside the slaves from the arena saw the evil spirit predator. As Cerberus approached, the sounds of murmur increased. However, the Cerberus didn't pose any action besides standing right beside Myung. Instead, the evil spirit predator who rode on top spoke. Myung, it is now okay to show my appearance, right? I called you because it was okay, you stupid. Shut up before I knit your lips, fairy. Gosh. Husband, did you hear him? This skeleton said he is going to knit Wuhee's lips. Oh my. How scary. Wuhee, who quarreling with the evil spirit predator, quickly went up to Myung and flew around him. Afterwards, she hid behind Myung and stuck her tongue out to provoke the evil spirit predator. The evil spirit predator clicked his tongue and turned his head. Fairy. The Cerberus and the fairy follows our Dear During the time, the noise became greater and their spirit instantly rose. The fairy was known to only follow heroes. Even more, since another top-ranked monster was also with Myung, they couldn't be more reassured. For the slaves to adjust, I needed to hide the evil spirit predator. There was a simply reason why he hid Cerberus and the evil spirit predator. It was to make over 2,000 slaves adapt to the territory. It would take time for them to accept the Dakibis and the humans, but to add on top a monster like this, their confusion would only accelerate. That was why an appropriate amount of time was needed for them to naturally accept what was going on, but due to the Fire Tars invasion, that period of time had been moved up. However, it wasn't bad. Myung spoke towards Graham. I wonder if you are assured of your victory even now. Graham, who was lost in words, moved his eyes and looked at the evil spirit predator. He knew right away that the evil spirit predator was a bigger problem than the Cerberus. The evil spirit predator was strong enough to face Ogre. Graham's rate of victory of an all-out war dropped below half. Myung also knew well of this. You kicked a warrior from our tribe. Graham spoke with difficulty. Then Myung scoffed at him. He and I had a proper duel. However, you guys didn't fulfill your promise. I definitely told you guys to get lost and leave my territory. Graham, what you did was no more and no less than an invasion. They didn't even have a cause. He was just being obstinate. But Graham continued to play innocent. It is different from the story I heard. Didn't you first attack our warriors? At the same time, the Dakibis all backlashed. You who is lost to all sense of shame. What nonsense are you speaking? Don't insult our A few thousand Dakibis saw it as well as the heavens. He spoke a lie without even changing his expression. Graham spoke more calmly. Ruler of Dakibis. When there is no way to reduce the gaps of their difference of opinions, there is a very easy way to solve it. Would you listen to my suggestion? Are you talking about 1 versus 1 fight? You're correct. As we are both in the position of a ruler, we each place our worth equally in fight. There is no easier way than this. Scoff. Why must I do this? Muyang instantly replied. It seemed like Graham thought Muyang would accept the duel he suggested. However, Muyang seemed elated. Why would he go around when there was a clear way? Swoosh. Anguish and Wicked God's sword started to ring violently. Specters came out and a strange cry was created. This is my land. The way we fight is decided upon me. Muyang was firm on his will. And right now, when Ogre was willing to help, this was his golden opportunity. A chance to wipe out the fire tars who dominated the surrounding territory and to take control of it. There is going to be a loss, but he couldn't just let go of this chance. As Graham seemed urgent in his expression, Muyang raised his sword and quietly spoke. Wipe out all intruders who entered without my permission. The words of an intruder who had no cause were obvious. At least for this fight, Muyang had a cause. Since it was a king's duty to fight intruders and protect the land. After the appearance of Ogre, the victory was already swaying towards Muyang. Including Graham, the 50 fire tars were all annihilated and Muyang devised a way to use these corpses. Of course, it should be refrained from the place Ogre was at. However, Muyang had full authority over these corpses. After moving the corpses to a different place, he used the art of death skill. Fire Ghoul is created. A combination of undead? Muyang recollected the dream he had about the Death Lord. At that time, the Death Lord mixed different corpses to produce an undead of a strange appearance. A different skill wasn't added but seemed like a subordinate art of death skill came up. I must combine it with the Prince and the Avengers. Muyang instantly remembered the other ghouls. If it was possible to strengthen it, he needed to take care of the Avengers first. They were all his comrades from the Forest of Death, but it was true that they were the ones that fell behind the most among the undead Muyang created. Reconstruction of death. It was Muyang's biggest strength to not hesitate. He instantly acted on what was on his mind. Soon the soul floated above the Avengers and the Fire Ghoul's head. By the look of it, it seemed like it would be combined with a focus on the main undead. Without hesitation, Muyang chose the Avenger. This was because by simply looking at the fighting power, the Fire Ghoul's was higher, but when thinking of its usefulness, the Avenger was the best. Crush. Afterwards, the Avengers and the Fire Ghoul's body were combined into one. Bones and skins were all starting to be recreated. And Muyang was amazed by its final form. Blazing Avenger is created. Plus really high dark resistance. Plus can move quickly in darkness. Plus dark binding, shadow hide, critical damage, flood of fire and mountain of fire skills are usable. Plus as the dark air current gets higher, it gets closer to darkness. Plus high resistance to fire. Plus it can get stronger by absorbing darkness and fire. Plus if something is killed by the mutant, depending on the infection ability, it can resurrect into a shadow, duration of 3 days. Blazing Avenger. A doll that was completely black like shadows with soft flames above its head. The size was reduced, but when thinking of its usefulness, this was much better. From the start, it was made into an undead out of a high-rank species, and since it wasn't in a good condition, this was the limit, but it wasn't bad at all. It gained the potential to develop and had both opposing aspects of darkness and fire. Decent. Muyang nodded his head. He could say that he earned an undead that was greater than his expectations. The undead's overall fighting power has increased about 30%. Muyang instantly made the undead into a talisman. Fortunately, since mutants were developing types of zombies, it was still able to get the effect of the Prince and the Avengers. On top, even if their appearance has changed, it wasn't good for it to be seen by Ogre. After managing the territory, I will go search for the 3 Pickaxe-Sack Alliance. Myung squeezed his fist tightly. He planned to move after recovering from the aftermath of the battle. He couldn't just continue to leave the materials to rust. The heart of the phoenix, dragon bones, piece of the earth dragon's skin, fairy's wing powder, and even the night crystal. He couldn't wait to use these materials to make equipment. It was a great battle they fought after creating the territory. It would be a lie if they said there was no damage. About 4,000 Dakibis died and about double the number suffered critical wounds. They acquired larger land, but they didn't have enough numbers to occupy the space. They couldn't be sure that a situation like this wouldn't happen again. He needed to make sure that defending troops were always on call. Even if they were to block trespassers as efficiently as they could, there was a limit with their current number. When Myung was planning to continue his thoughts, Ogre came to him. Haha. Were you well until now? Thank you for helping. This is nothing, since you are truly our savior. By the way. With half-closed eyes he studied Myung and then tilted his head. As if you have decided but haven't, it's uncertain. What are you talking about? Your true appearance. Myung nodded his head. When he last parted with Ogre, Ogre said, if we ever do meet again, that time make sure you know what you are. It was probably because he knew that Myung was a human. He was probably questioned since Myung had the appearance of a Dakibi. He meant for Myung to choose between a human or a Dakibi, but Myung didn't care. The star of absolute that floats in the sky is where Myung's purity lied. Is my appearance important? Myung firmly spoke. By looking at Myung's entrenched attitude, Ogre's eyes shined. Ogre thought that Myung would choose one or the other, but Myung gave an alternate answer. It was something even Ogre didn't expect. You're right, appearance isn't important. Huh. Are you already enlightened to that point? It's truly a scary speed of development. Ogre laughed outright. He was already treating Myung as his close friend. Besides thinking of him as his savior, he felt a sense of closeness to Myung, who was walking a lonely path of a warrior. Although it has only been a few months, Myung pioneered his own path. Although Ogre himself had induced his awakening, but that just slightly opened up his possibilities. It was a good thing that I finished the work quietly. Myung secretly bagged the corpses of fire tars and made them into undead. Afterwards he quickly made them into a talisman to hide their appearance. If Ogre saw this, it would be hard to expect his current friendly attitude. Ogre, could you protect my territory? What's more, Myung added another favor. The current situation of his territory was at its worst. Half of the Dakibis who were supposed to be working hard were unable to move due to this battle, so the gap was clearly visible. The territory just began to build structure and was still at the early stages. However, Myung couldn't continue to be tied up at the territory. He needed to at least make defenses before he left, but with just Baltan and a few undead he was lacking. So he concluded that he needed Ogre's help. The territory? Where are you planning to go? That's right. However, the period of absence won't be long. This was no more than a measure of insurance just in case. However, since the fire tars disappeared, numerous monsters might come after and attack this place. Ogre brushed his chin while he spoke. This is quite an interesting place. Although it is only a start, I have never seen different types of species living together in one place. Ogre, if it wasn't for you, I would have denied all of this. Myung was certain. Since the majority were negative about that many species being associated with each other. At least to Myung, who doesn't have a prejudice against them, something like this was possible. It would have also been impossible if they didn't join up under Myung's name. Grin. Ogre showed his teeth. Myung, I like the way you do things. Although it is a way I have never seen until now and never thought of, but you have done it. I'm interested in what you will do and what you will achieve. Even when Myung thought of Ogre once more, he really seemed like a strange fire tar. A species which no other monster could easily approach. Weren't fire tars the species that chose safety more than any other for that reason? However, Ogre's mind was completely occupied by exploring new things. And Muyang was chosen as the subject. Thump. Ogre nailed his spear to the group and continued to talk. So I will protect his place until the 180th night. However, I cannot assure anything afterwards. I must return to my tribe when the Devil's Long Night starts. Devil's Long Night. It meant a period of time where devils were active in the demon god's territory. For a few months, endless nights continued and devils freely roamed. Normally they were weak devils that couldn't resist their instincts, but for the ones living in the demon god's territory, it was troublesome, and to prepare for the upcoming nights, it meant that Ogre needed to return to his tribe. Muyang nodded his head. That is enough. If anything, it was more than he expected. Since he was going to protect the territory during this risky period, it was obvious he needed to return during that time, and he also needed to find a way to strengthen his territory. The Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance will be my answer. He felt it was possible as long as he had someone who was originally part of the dwarves. Everyone acknowledged a dwarf's technical skills. Even more, the Dwarf Alliance, the Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance, was in the top ranks. The lord at that place, Bartas the God's Hammer, was a dwarf who had the insight and the philosopher's knowledge. If Muyang could earn his help, it was like earning the safety of his territory. Muyang, but it doesn't seem like there is a house for me to stay in. Haha. Ogre, who was blazing with flames and had the trunk of the Pums tree tied to his waist, tapped his waist as he joked. Well, it was certain there wasn't a house for his size. I will try to have your house built first. As Muyang spoke with a serious look, Ogre cleared his throat. Ahem, was a joke. Don't take it so seriously. I can just sleep using the sky as my blanket. Joke, he says. A tip of Muyang's lips curled up. Ogre considered Muyang to be close enough that he could even toss a joke. Muyang also felt this, but to be honest, it didn't really appeal to him. A close friend. It was because his concept of a friend was quite faint. For 40 years Muyang didn't have a friend. All the people who approached him had died. Or killed. Although he did take care of Kim Taehwan and Bei Suzy momentarily, when he met them at the Blue Temple, it wasn't enough to say they were close friends. However, Ogre was the only one who he could look at as a friend. Please protect it well. Just as Muyang spoke, Ogre frowned. I like everything about you, but you are more boring than other fire tars. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Since Muyang was able to get Ogre's promise, he was more free in his movements. He geared up right away. He was tight on time. Kalmo, do you know the location of the Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance? Just to be sure and to double-check, he asked Kalmu. The old dwarf, Kalmu, looked sad as he shook his head. Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance always changes their location to avoid the eyes of dragons. Dwarves were good at finding and making treasures. It was obvious that they could only be the target of dragons that liked glittering things. No matter the type, dragons were the super powerful monsters that were at least on the second level of the top rank. And besides the demon kings and the demon gods, the one with the most numbers in the transcendent species were dragons. In the underworld, there weren't many fearless people who mingled with dragons, and if they did show interest in dragons, it was normally for an unpleasant reason. Also, for the Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance's survival, they needed to routinely change their base. There must be big and small bases they continuously use. As Muyang was certain, Kalmu drooled. There are 5, but that was a long time ago. I cannot be certain that my memory is correct. It doesn't matter. Where is the closest location from here? Kalmu was locked up in the underground arena for a long time. It wouldn't be weird if they changed those locations or increased them during that time. However, they would have habitually left a mark at those places, so that only particular people could recognize and understand the location where they moved. And Muyang also had the skills to read those signs. It was also the basic knowledge of an assassin. It's a cliff called the Annan's Brain. Muyang lightly clicked his tongue. It was a place he never heard of before. However, he didn't have any time to waste. To find the location, he needed to move even a second faster. It was, however, fortunate for the existence of the Cerberus. Since flight was possible, he could move at a much faster speed. Do I need to also ride it? Kalmu gulped his saliva as he became nervous. It was because getting on Cerberus's back was as fearful as getting inside a dragon's mouth. Let's get going. However, Myung was cold towards him. If you don't get on, you will be left behind. After realizing his meaning, Kalmu hurriedly yelled, "Why wait for me?" In an awkward position, he grabbed hold of its hair and got on the Cerberus's back. After checking the last rider, the evil spirit predator slapped the sides of Cerberus with his legs. Then wings made of evil spirits appeared on both sides of the Cerberus and it began to soar. Annan's brain. Although Kalmu said it was a cliff, there were no cliffs to be found. Everything was horribly destroyed and only its remains were rolling around. An empty hole was pierced into a mountain, as if something with enormous strength pierced through. There were no signs of lodgment. It seems like it was an act of a dragon. It seems like that even to me. Myung motionlessly looked at the mountain that lost half its figure while he had his arms crossed. The traces left after a dragon swept a place was a tragic disaster like this. Did it sweep the place since it couldn't find the location of the dwarves? Probably. Bardas knew how to make walls that dragons couldn't easily detect. Since it couldn't locate the place, it probably just blew up the entire place. However, it seems like it hasn't been long since it happened. Myung could only feel a bit strange by that part. By looking at the surrounding plants, it didn't seem long since the mountain was destroyed. At most a month ago. Did they run away after being discovered, or was the mountain destroyed to vent its anger? It seemed like he needed to look around a bit more. Quiet. It was at that moment. The evil spirit predator spoke in a low voice. Pahang. At the same time, a huge cry violently shook the entire mountain range. Kalmu shivered his body. Myung also knitted his brows. A cry that instinctively stimulated people's fear. It was a dragon's cry. Soon, a huge existence appeared beyond the skies. A completely black figure with wings bigger than anyone else. Dark dragon. It was a bit different than a magic dragon. Although the dark dragon was similar to a magic dragon, it was a dragon particularly known for its lack of patience. If you were caught, every bone in your body would be broken. It would be the same if he had Cerberus and the evil spirit predator with him. The further up you got in the top ranks, the difference became noticeably greater. For now, there was no way for Myung to win against a dark dragon. Luckily, the dark dragon didn't stop and continued to roam above the sky. It was hurriedly headed towards some place. Pant. Pant. After it completely disappeared from their sight, Kalmu let out his breath. And he hurriedly spoke towards Myung. Ah, it's the dark dragon Barca. Oh no. Dark dragon Barca? The fiercest dragon that's after Bardas. Why is it in a place like this? Kalmu clenched his teeth. The dark dragon Barca that's after the Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance. Seemed like it was the culprit that destroyed the mountain. It seemed like it was certain that this mountain was one of the places they resided, but for some reason it left this place. Dragons were known to have strong obsessions. And the dark dragons were more famous for not losing a prey they targeted. If Barca stayed for more than a month and decided to leave, the reason was obvious. I need to hurry. It located the next location the alliance might be at. Myung wrinkled his forehead and confirmed the direction Barca flew towards. There was a time when the Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance had been greatly reduced in the past. God Hand Bartas, the lord of that place, was a dwarf who played an active role even 5 years from now. When the Sun Guild, Alexandro Quintart's guild, was roaming around the demon god's territory, they would find traces of him. Afterwards, many eye-widening equipment were released and the existence of Bartas came to light. However, even the Sun Guild and Alexandro were unable to keep Bartas in their grasp. They said there was a dragon attack. It was clearly the dark dragon. They were able to figure out Bartas's identity, but they were attacked by an unknown dragon. In the end, Bardas left them and the Sun Guild could only hastily fall back. Seemed like that dragon was Barca. Either way, Bardas had momentarily been under the Sun Guild's command, and there were a few stories Muyang had heard back then. Amongst them was a story about the size of the Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance. It was a complaint about how they wouldn't have had to run away like now if they hadn't been so prideful and defended properly before the dragon seriously started to attack. And this story took place 5 years ago. And during that time Bardas overlooked the blacksmiths in the Sun Guild for a bit, but their skills rapidly rose during the short amount of time he stayed. There was a dominate review that if Bardas continued to stay with the Sun Guild, he would have been a game changer. After 5 years, when the influence and power changed as they started to pioneer in the demon god's territory, all the organization indiscriminately started to keep each other in check even once the great calamity occurred. In the turmoil where they could not see what was waiting for them, the equipment which God Hand Bartas left behind glistened more than others. Even the blacksmiths who had been under the tutelage of Bartas for a short period of time shined brightly. If now was a time before they were attacked by the dragon, so a time when the size wasn't reduced, there is an opportunity for me to interfere. Muyang rubbed his chin. He knew that the dark dragon Barca would continue to obsess over Bartas even 5 years later. If he could resolve this problem, he could easily earn the help of Bartas. However, it was impossible to face the dark dragon Barca in an all-out war. It would be the same even if the Cerberus evil spirit predator and the Hell Horse joined. However, if Bardas decided to help him, the results could change. Bardas is being too prideful. I need to break that pride and at the same time stop Barca. Bardas lived up to his name as God Hand and was very prideful. That was why he lost and had received an unrecoverable loss. Muyang stood still as he pondered before turning his head. Kalmu, do you know anything about Bartas? You mean God Hand Bartas? Well, if you're a dwarf, everyone knows him. With a puzzled look, Kalmu nodded. Tell me everything you know. Although they were in a hurry, simply moving wasn't everything. Since he had a rough understanding of the current situation, he needed to devise a plan. Why would there be a saying, more haste, less speed? Muyang was careful. If he just interfered without much thought, he could lose everything. The opponent was the dark dragon Barca. Since Barca was in existence, Muyang couldn't make rash movements about. Not too long after Barca left, Muyang was able to find a sign. It was something that looked similar to a compass, and when he shook it a bit, it reacted. It seems like it was made to react to a dragon's magical powers. Muyang held the compass with his hand. It seemed like it didn't work since there were no dragons nearby. By looking at how it fiercely reacted when Barca was nearby, it is shaking at regular intervals. The compass was pointing towards the east. However, he couldn't just move by looking at that sign. This movement was a type of code. Muyang tried to interpret this slight shaking movement in different ways. He twisted his body after realizing that the signal changed as he changed the bearing. And he climbed up the Cerberus and told the direction. We will go north. What? But Barca is heading east. It's a trap. The alliance is north. Muyang was more than half certain that there were more of those compasses than just one. It was a type of trap in order to lure Barca. The shaking was pointing towards the north. Since it didn't react to the dragon's magical powers, it seemed like Barca moved by just looking at the arrows. He's completely arrogant. After solving the code to the compass, Muyang chuckled. Kalmu said that Bartas was his own lord throughout heaven and earth, and it was exactly as he stated. He didn't fear the dragon but rather enjoyed toying with it. If the dragon noticed that the magical powers of the compass were reacting strangely, it would be able to find the location of the alliance without a doubt. Look carefully if there are a group of monsters on our way there. The dark dragon Barca barked up the wrong tree. That meant he saved that much time. He still needed to hurry, but that didn't mean he could move without caution. Since he had figured out the location of the alliance, he now needed to lay out his bait. In order to make Bartas seek his dear help, it seemed like a little hardship was needed. The north side was a land full of snow. It was a place where the wind fiercely blew and the snowstorm raged. Of course, it was only natural that a lot of the monsters that were located here could only specialize in cold. Muyang got off at the center of icy roads and looked around for traces. It's the territory of ice trolls and the abominable snowman. The remaining footprints and the teeth marks on the corpses allowed Muyang to instantly find out what types of species lived in the surrounding area. On top, he was able to understand that the two were hostile towards each other. Food is scarce here. Especially the fish they get from this place is their main source of food. Piercing a hole through the ice and catching fish were both of their methods in getting their food. However, the lake wasn't that wide. Of course, they could only run into each other. Kalmu, I need you to become my bait. Bait. Kalmu tilted his head to the side after hearing Muyang's nonsense. As if Muyang expected it, he slowly explained it to him. I need your help in order to lure the ice troll and the abominable snowman. You're saying my help? Yes. Just to be sure, Kalmu wanted to reconfirm with Muyang, but his will seemed firm. Kalmu closed his eyes and rubbed his beard. If you need my help, I would, of course, be of your assistance, but may I ask the reason? After finishing his son's revenge, Kalmu decided to be Muyang's slave himself. He even had the intentions to die if Muyang asked him to. However, he couldn't do anything about his curiosity. If the three Pickaxe Sack Alliance were somewhere around here, why didn't he try to find them right away but want him to be the bait for other monsters? Muyang quietly turned his gaze and looked past the north side. I will attack Bartes. Did I hear something wrong? Kalmua's eyes greatly widened. To attack God Hand Bartes. Didn't Muyang want to ask the three Pickaxe Sack Alliance for their help? There was no greater contradiction than this. However, Muyang's expression didn't even change for the slightest bit. Bartes is completely wrapped up in his dignity. He ignores the dragons and toys with them. If the dark dragon Barca finds the alliance, it would be too late. Before then, we need to awaken his sense of alertness. It was true. Alertness. God Hand Bartes needed to be aware himself that he isn't perfect. Only then would he need Muyang's help. If Muyang approached him now, he wouldn't be able to earn everything he wanted. Since he had freed Kalmu, he might gain a favorable impression from Bartes. At most, Bartes would make an equipment with just the materials he brought. However, with just those, it wouldn't be enough. Muyang desperately needed Bartes's help in order to prepare for the Devil's Long Night. For that, it was best to be in a position where he could help him first. However, from Kalmua's expression, it seemed like he still didn't understand. Can't we just approach Bartes and tell him the truth? There is only one chance. If he refuses, that would be the end. We need to make a situation where he can't refuse. Ah. Kalmu then understood. Kalmu was also already aware of God Hand Bartes's arrogance. He was famous for not changing his mind once he made his decision. Even if Muyang told his story, what would he believe in and follow? Since Kalmu also spent a long time as a slave, he also didn't have right to speak. If anything, it would be fortunate if Bartes didn't think suspiciously of him. I understand. I will readily become bait. However, we probably need to find their location first. I have a place in mind. Already? If you read Bartes's personality, it isn't difficult. Muyang calmly spoke. But Kalmua's eyes were still with questions. He is quite the mysterious figure. He was like an onion. No matter how many times he was peeled, a new part appeared. Even so, Muyang never failed when he acted with certainty. There was a reason to his every movement. Of course, there were times when his ways were to the extreme, but he always produced a result beyond expected. Who in the world would think to attack when they are going to ask for help? Kalmu inwardly shook his head before starting to speak. Then we just need to decide how I'm going to be bait. I already have something in mind. Of course you do. I will just follow. He most likely had not thought of a plan beforehand and instead would have thought of it just now. However, Kalmu didn't have doubt him in the slightest and simply nodded his head. He was just a slave and followed him. And Muyang was a wise owner. God-hand Bartes, the lord of the Three Alliance and the ruler that ruled over 30,000 dwarves. Every dwarf trusted and followed him, since that was the only way they could ensure their safety. The castle Bartes made had never allowed an invasion. Even if it was discovered, it would only quietly disappear. Bartes had the knack of knowing when the dragon would approach him and avoided it ahead of time. Although Bartes had the bearing of a tyrant, the reason why no one could show their discontent was the same as above. If they brought it up, they would be chased out of the castle. The dwarves who were chased out of the castle were quickly exposed to danger and died. So they could only follow Bartes. However, that strength could only be expressed when the castle Bartes made had never allowed an invasion. Someone has touched the magic barrier of the castle walls. The wall has been exposed. Our base has been discovered. 2000 ice trolls and abominable snowman are attacking the gate. The dwarves who went out to scout made a fuss as they approached Bartes. Bartes was sitting on a rocking chair inside his castle. A thick crown placed on his head and all sorts of accessories hung from his body. However, he couldn't get up after hearing the news. What? The wall has been exposed. Impossible. A high-level invisible spell was cast onto the wall. The wall was never exposed until now, since it was a spell which Bartes has invented and placed by using the weak points of every living creature. That was why the dragons couldn't even find their specific location and destroyed the surroundings. It is true. Come out and check. Bartes lifted his short legs and went out of the castle. And after seeing that the invisibility on the huge castle walls was lifted, he became dumbstruck. Thud. Even more, since numerous monsters were knocking the castle wall, the confusion could only double. Who the hell? When someone hid and there were no ways to immediately chase them down, it was the basics of tracking to analyze the person's usual behavior and personality. And Muyang knew of God-hand Bartes's arrogance. There was a high chance that he didn't hide deep underground but in an unlikely place where it was in plain sight. After investigating a few suspicious places, there was an awkward location but nothing was visible. The snow reached high and vine-like plants were surrounding the place. If it wasn't for Muyang, who was used to all the hidden traps, it wouldn't have been noticeable, but Muyang was certain. There are perception-distorting magic and invisibility magic casted. Even if they entered the vines, they would still get lost. By just realizing this truth, Muyang could go in the right direction. Muyang had the directional awareness to be able to see through a simple distortion of his perception. When he entered deeper parts, he was able to feel a clear but hard wall. The problem was how he was going to reveal this transparent wall. Bartes has prepared all methods. A way to find and a way to lift the magic were all inside the compass. After awakening his pure state, he was able to instinctively detect the flow of magic, and he could tell that this flow of magic was different. And that different flow was completely opposite from the magical power he could feel from the compass. It seemed like if the two opposite flows were found, it would return to the original. So he went around the invisible castle and tried to match the direction of the compass depending on the bearing. As expected. Then the flow of magic that was slightly off course returned back to normal. Eventually, the huge and strong appearance of the castle slowly appeared. Bartes. He was truly an arrogant dwarf. He left the method openly as if allowing others to find him if they could. His skills were certainly great, but Muyang knew this arrogance will hold him back. Right after the invisibility was removed, Muyang prepared for the next step. It was the under-the-table work for Kalmu to become the bait and draw the ice trolls and the abominable snowmen. A medicine good for the body is normally bitter. It was a way for him to awaken Bartes's alertness. He hoped was that it wouldn't be too bitter that he would spit it out. The method for Kalmu to drag the ice trolls and the abominable snowman's attention was simple. By going in between the two who were fiercely fighting for the resources that were limited and stealing the resources that they were fighting for. I don't know why I have to partake in something like this. You need to run faster than that. Kalmu was running madly across the ice as fast as he could. Beside him, the evil spirit predator was using a great number of specters in order to hide his appearance and was helping Kalmu to run away easily. Kalmu was holding a great big fish net full of fish. Without the help of the specters, it would have been impossible either way, but they were able to steal the food of the abominable snowmen and the ice trolls right in front of them. The ice trolls and the abominable snowmen could only see Kalmu. Kya. They were chasing Kalmu with their neck veins bulging and screaming their lungs out. Of course, a few of the monsters were greatly influenced as they were possessed by specters, losing their conscience and going wild. Since when a few lose conscience and start to go wild, it would infect other monsters as well. It is crazy. Kalmu truly thought that, with his bare body, provoke about 2,000 monsters? It was truly something that not even a suicidal person could easily do. He would instantly disappear without a trace of a bone piece if he was to be caught by them. On top of that, as he was thinking that these crazily running monsters were intended to attack Bartas, he felt a slight guilt. However, it could not be undone. Kalmu clenched his teeth and ran. The result was the current situation. As 2,000 monsters were crazily knocking on the door, the huge castle gate shook violently. If the trolls and abominable snowmen were to combine their strengths, they were famous to display ogre-like strength. No matter how sturdy the castle walls were, if tens of ogres were knocking on the gate, it wouldn't be possible to stop them. If it continued like this, it was too obvious that the castle gates were going to be broken. He is responding late. Muyang climbed up the exterior wall and looked around the surrounding. Although there were traps, magic and etc. prepared for intruders, they couldn't fool Muyang's eyes. There was always a gap in between them and Muyang was like a fish in the water and walked leisurely in between them. If it continues like this, the gate might break. They say that the numbers are greater than 2,000? The dwarves were greatly taken aback and weren't able to easily make the next move to deal with the situation. They only thought of a way to escape in case of a dragon's attack and never in the world thought that the castle would be found by normal monsters and would be invaded by them. Sheeps without a shepherd. It was a thought that naturally occurred. What was the point of having strong, sturdy castle walls? What could thousands of dwarves do when they are grouped together? This happened because they only believed in their wall and neglected other ways to deal with the situation. And in the middle of this was Bartas. He could tell just by looking at the inner parts of the wall. As Bartas reigned as the lord of the Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance, it seemed like he used other dwarves as his slaves. Besides the castle, all other buildings were very poor, unlike the dwarves to dwell in. What should we do? Let's go to Bartas. If it is Bartas, he will give us the answer. It didn't seem like there was a guideline for the confused dwarves. Their trust only in Bartas's insight, and their reliance on him appeared in numerous conversations. If enemies appear, they should instantly put on their armor and raise their swords to stop the gate from opening. Like the time when the Dakibis confronted the fire tars, even that wasn't enough to keep them in check in order to prevent them from coming in further. But the dwarves first started to gather inside the castle. There were no dwarves who made an arbitrary decision to arm themselves. It was probably because Bartas was that great, but from how they managed this, Muyang could only be disappointed. True slaves don't even know that they are slaves themselves. By looking at the dwarves who couldn't do anything without Bartas's orders, Muyang couldn't help but have this thought. However, it wasn't the time yet to cut them off. Muyang entered the castle and started to move. We are much greater in number. Even though the transparency of the wall has been removed, those are no greater than coincidence. There are no reasons to fear if it isn't a dragon. A dwarf with his crown placed on his head and all sorts of accessories hung from his body was presenting a speech in front of the castle. Muyang could tell right away. That dwarf was Bartas. Could we fight against trolls? There aren't many dwarves that know how to fight. They only know how to blow the bellows. The dwarves were still frightened. It was something they had never experienced before. Muyang waited for Bartas's reaction. It was an embarrassment to run away from just 2,000 monsters and not a dragon. As a lord, his face would be lost. Finally, Bardas took out his sword. The weapons we have created can even rip apart an ogre's body. What are you worried about? Raise your weapons. Now is the time to show the true strength of dwarves. As expected, Bardas chose to fight. Dwarves weren't a physically strong species. However, the equipment they have made could close the gap of their physical difference. Bardas's next move didn't seem that bad. By choosing just the ones who knew how to fight, he protected the gate. They shot arrows and huge crossbows. There were also items that were similar to cannons. And by operating a detached force, he made them sneak out the back gate and attack the backs of the surviving monsters. The tactical strategy itself isn't bad. After fighting for more than half a day, they were able to massacre 2,000 monsters. It didn't seem like Bardas was a good lord just by appearance. All the dwarves were carried away by their triumph. However, would they know that this wasn't the end of it? That it hasn't even properly began. After the fight, Bardas placed the transparent spell on the wall and inspected the security. However, before he could even figure out the main cause, the next attack started. It was because few hundreds of orcs with blue leather found the castle. Moon orc. Bardas could only turn pale after looking at the orcs. The moon orcs should be a species that live quite far to the north from here. It was hard to understand why the moon orcs would suddenly head towards the castle. Even more, the transparency had once again been broken. It was never broken naturally. Someone is continuously removing the security. Bardas was dripping cold sweat. They also defended against the moon orcs, but now before they could even recover, numerous werewolves appeared. We will all die. Like this, there is no hope. The dwarves couldn't even sleep properly. They were slowly being encroached by fear. Still, Bardas couldn't make a decision easily. Is it waiting for us to come out of the castle and run away? It wouldn't be a dragon, but who could it be? The biggest problem was he had no way of figuring out who the opponent was and what his intentions were in removing their security. If it was a dragon, it wouldn't use a complicated method like this. If it knew how to remove it, it could just have done that. Bardas used his head. Either way, he couldn't be just toyed by the opponent's intentions. However, the number and the species of the monsters that were invading were just the amounts for them to continuously defend. It was awkward to run away and awkward to continuously defend. Hence, it was odd, but he didn't have time to think deeply. In the end, Bardas's wisdom was starting to break down due to the endless wave of monsters. This happened because of the continuous battle he wasn't used to. As he postponed his decision a few times within the castle, he didn't concern about the fighting spirit of the dwarves at all. Thump. At last, the castle gate broke. After a full 15 days, the monster that appeared was staggering twin-head ogre. Although it had 2 heads, it was the monster of the monsters that could exhibit the strength of 20 ogres. Ah! The twin-head ogre. Run, we need to run. The eyes of the dwarves were full of despair. There were even dwarves that dropped their weapon. What should we do? Even Bardas was taken back. However, it was already too late. The twin-head ogre entered the castle and was massacring the dwarves. The only way was for them to run away. To prepare for the attack of the dragon, didn't they prepare a few ways to leave the castle? I will escape the castle. All of you stop the twin-head ogre. As Lord Bardas retreated, the fighting spirit of the dwarves reached rock bottom. It was when all the dwarves' eyes were filled with despair. Blaze. A Dakibi appeared as he sliced an arm of the twin-head ogre. Kaya. The twin-head ogre held its sliced-off arm and went insane. For a moment, the Dakibi turned his head and talked to the dwarves that were stepping back. The twin-head ogre is weak against fire. We can catch it if we pour gunpowder on it. However, the dwarves couldn't easily move. So the Dakibi suddenly cried out. Are there only dwarf cowards? Heimdall will weep. Heimdall. The name of the god the dwarves worshipped. But, after listening to his words, Bardas stopped his movement. The Dakibi was obviously Muyang. Muyang inwardly smiled after looking at Bartas. God hand Bartas. The dwarf with insight and knowledge but was completely arrogant due to his skills greater than any of the other dwarves. Nonetheless, in the end, Muyang knew he was still a coward. However, he wouldn't have always been a coward. If he is just a coward, he couldn't have become a lord. And Muyang's thoughts were exactly right. Bardas, who was running away, stopped and shook his body. He was devoted to Heimdall more than anyone else. How dare a Dakibi talk about us? The emotions he had suppressed until now had bursted out.